The camera flickers on, bathing me in the familiar, flattering light of my studio. I flash my trademark smile at the camera, ready to charm my millions of followers. My setup is impeccable, a backdrop of tastefully arranged plants, art, and state-of-the-art tech creating a visually appealing scene. To my audience, I am the epitome of confidence and charisma. But beneath the surface, anxiety gnaws at me, a shadow lurking just out of sight. Hey everyone, welcome back. I greet my viewers, my voice steady, hiding the undercurrent of unease. As I wrap up my latest video, I carefully check my messages, a routine that has become a necessary evil. There are more than 100 new notifications, and I know many of them are from him. My rise to fame was meteoric. One day, I was just another face in the crowd. The next, I was a sensation. My content, lifestyle tips, travel vlogs, and my own personal musings resonated with millions of people. The endless grind of creating, editing, and posting videos finally paid off. I loved the connection I felt with my followers, the sense of community and support that we had built. But fame comes with its dark side. Amid the waves of adoration and praise, there were always a few unsettling messages. It started innocently enough. A message from a man in New Zealand claiming to be my father. He spoke of a son who disappeared 15 years ago, lost without a trace. I felt sympathy for him. Imagining the pain of a parent who lost his child, I thought it was a case of mistaken identity, an understandable error. At first, I responded with kindness, hoping to gently correct his mistake. "I'm sorry, but you're mistaken. I'm not your son," I wrote, trying to be as compassionate as possible. His messages were filled with sorrow and longing, and my heart went out to him, but as days turned into weeks, the messages kept coming, growing more frequent and insistent. His tone shifted from pleading to demanding. He was convinced I was his long-lost son, and nothing I could say would dissuade him. I tried to ignore the situation, assuring myself it was just an unfortunate misunderstanding. Yet each new notification sent a shiver down my spine. The man's words became increasingly desperate, weaving a narrative of a life I had never lived. He described memories we never shared, events I had never experienced. His obsession was consuming him, and it began to consume me as well. I could feel the weight of his belief pressing down on me, a relentless pressure that would not let up. The messages became a deluge. Over 40 a day. Each one was more insistent than the last, filled with accusations, pleas, and declarations of love. I started to dread checking my messages, knowing what awaited me. His words, a constant reminder that I couldn't escape his fixation. The frequency and intensity of his communication were suffocating. It was like he had invaded my life, my mind, and there was no way to expel him. I blocked him, hoping to regain some semblance of normalcy, but he was relentless, creating new profiles and reappearing like a specter haunting my digital life. Every time I thought I was rid of him, he found a way back. My frustration turned into fear. What if he found me? What if he came to confront me in person? The thought was terrifying, a shadow that darkened my every waking moment. Then came the final straw, a video message, filmed in silhouette, his voice low and menacing, repeating a chilling mantra. "I will see you soon." The words echoed in my mind, a scary promise that felt all too real. I felt a cold dread settle in my bones. This wasn't just a delusion. It was a threat. The video played over and over in my mind, each repetition tightening the knot of fear in my stomach. I reported him to the police, hoping they could intervene. They assured me they were monitoring the situation, but it did little to assuage my fear. Every creak of my apartment, every shadow flickering in the corner of my eye became a reminder of the looming threat. The video haunted me. I couldn't escape the sound of his voice, the certainty of his words, "I will see you soon." The simplicity of the message was its most terrifying aspect. It wasn't a plea or a demand, it was a promise. After receiving the video, I went straight to the police. I handed over the evidence of his harassment, the countless messages, and the chilling video. They assured me they would investigate and keep an eye on the situation, but once again their reassurances did little to quell my growing fear. Even my apartment now felt dangerous. The safe haven of my home was now a prison, its walls closing in as his presence loomed larger. Days turned into weeks, and the police investigation seemed to stall. The messages continued, each new profile a reminder of his relentless pursuit. The authorities told me they were doing their best, but their best wasn't enough. The man in New Zealand had succeeded in invading my life, his obsession casting a very dark shadow over everything I held dear. I was trapped in a nightmare of his making, unable to wake up, unable to escape. My content creation suffered. I found it harder to focus, harder to find joy in the work I once loved. My followers noticed the change, commenting on my increasingly sporadic uploads and the exhaustion that seemed to seep through the screen. They didn't know about the shadow that loomed over me, the fear that gripped me every time I turned on my camera. The stalker's messages grew more brazen. He described watching my latest videos, commenting on specific details that sent chills down my spine. He mentioned places I had been, people I had seen, making it clear that his knowledge of my life extended far beyond what I shared online. The sense of being constantly watched was suffocating. I began to wonder how much more of my personal information he had managed to uncover. The line between my public persona and private life, now completely blurred, left me feeling very exposed and vulnerable. Sleep became elusive. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his silhouette, heard his voice whispering that ominous promise, "I will see you soon." The exhaustion was wearing me down, making it hard to keep up the facade of normalcy. Friends and family grew concerned, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them the full extent of what was happening. I didn't want to worry them, and part of me feared that talking about it would make it even more real. One evening, I was sitting in my living room, attempting to relax with a book, when my phone buzzed. Another message notification. My stomach churned as I opened it. It was from yet another new profile, but the content was the same delusional claims, the same insistence that I was his son. My hands trembled as I read his words. He spoke of crossing an ocean, of coming to find me. The fear that had been simmering beneath the surface boiled over. This was no longer just digital harassment. It was a real and imminent threat. I doubled down on security, installing new locks, setting up cameras around my apartment, and even hiring a private security consultant. Despite these measures, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was all futile. His promise echoed in my mind, an inescapable refrain, "I will see you soon." My world continued to shrink. The places that once brought me joy felt tainted by his presence. My favorite cafe, the park where I jogged, even the grocery store all became sites of potential danger. I avoided eye contact with strangers, paranoid that anyone could be him. The constant vigilance was exhausting, draining me of energy and hope. The tipping point came one night while I was editing a video. My phone buzzed with another new notification. With a sinking feeling, I opened the message. It was a photo taken from outside my apartment building. The angle was unmistakable. He was here. My breath caught in my throat. The man who had haunted my digital life had crossed over into the real world. Panicked, I called the police, my voice shaking as I explained the situation. They promised to send a patrol car, but I knew it would be too late. The distance between us had collapsed. He was here, in my city, outside my home. I closed the blinds and double-checked the locks, my heart pounding in my chest. The minutes stretched into an eternity as I waited for the police to arrive. Every sound outside my apartment seemed amplified, each one a potential sign of his approach. I stayed away from the windows, my back pressed against the wall, trying to steady my breathing. When the police finally arrived, they did a thorough search of the area but found no sign of him. They assured me they would keep an eye on my building, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. To them, he was just another faceless threat, another case in an endless sea of digital harassment. But to me, he was a tangible monster, lurking just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to strike. As the police left, I realized that the thin veneer of safety I had clung to was gone. He had breached the last barrier, bringing his obsession into the physical world. The fear was no longer something I could manage. It was now a part of my reality, an ever-present shadow that followed me everywhere. The days following the photo incident were a blur of anxiety and sleepless nights. I became hypervigilant, my senses on constant high alert. Each day bled into the next, a continuous loop of paranoia and dread. The police patrolled sporadically, but their presence did little to ease my fears. I felt like a prisoner in my own home, trapped by the threat lurking just outside. Despite everything I knew, I had to maintain some semblance of normalcy. My followers relied on my content and my livelihood depended on it. I decided to do a live stream, hoping that the interaction would provide a distraction, if only for a little while. I set up my equipment meticulously, ensuring everything was perfect. As I prepared to go live, I took a deep breath, forcing a smile. The familiar rush of adrenaline coursed through me as I hit the Go Live button, and the screen filled with comments from my loyal followers. "Hey everyone, how's it going?" I greeted them, my voice steady. The chat was lively, filled with supportive messages and questions about my latest content. For a brief moment, I almost felt normal again. As the stream continued, I engaged with my audience, answering questions and sharing updates. The interaction was comforting, a reminder that there was still a world outside my fear. But that sense of security was fleeting. Midway through the stream, I noticed a shift in the chat. The comments, once filled with excitement and curiosity, suddenly changed. Messages started flooding in, all with the same urgent command: "Turn around." At first, I thought it was a prank. My followers love to play tricks on me during live streams, and I usually take it in stride. But the sheer volume and intensity of the messages made me pause. My heart rate spiked as I glanced at the webcam feed, my breath catching in my throat. There, standing behind me, was my stalker. His eyes were wild, his expression a mix of madness and determination. The chat exploded with panic, my viewers witnessing the nightmare unfold in real time. My body went cold, fear paralyzing me as I tried to process what was happening. The stalker moved closer, his presence overwhelming. I felt a surge of adrenaline, the fight or flight response kicking in. I chose to fight. Spinning around, I faced him, my fists clenched. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice shaking. But he didn't respond to my words. His eyes locked onto mine and he lunged. The struggle was violent, chaotic. We crashed into furniture, my carefully curated studio falling apart around us. He was strong, his obsession giving him a terrifying intensity. He kept shouting, insisting that I was his son, that he had to save me from the demon he believed me to be. In the heat of the struggle, his voice rose to a fever pitch. "I buried you in the ground myself, demon," he screamed. The words sent a shockwave through me. He believed he had killed his son, and now he was trying to do it again. Desperation fueled my resistance. I managed to land a solid hit, knocking him off balance. For a brief moment, I had the upper hand. I glanced at the screen, realizing the live feed was still broadcasting. My audience was seeing everything. "Did you see that?" I gasped out, directing my voice to the viewers. The chat was a blur of responses, confirming my worst fear. They had seen it all. I struggled to end the live feed. The last thing I needed was for my audience to witness more of this horror. Finally, the stream cut off, plunging the room into silence. The only sound was our ragged breathing, the aftermath of the violent confrontation hanging heavily in the air. My heart pounded in my ears as I stared at the man who had brought such chaos into my life. He was on his knees now, his face a mask of desperation and confusion. The intensity of the struggle had drained us both, leaving a tense stillness in its wake. As I caught my breath, I saw the change in his eyes. The rage that had fueled his attack was ebbing away, replaced by a strange mix of sorrow and recognition. He looked at me, really looked at me, as if seeing me for the first time. "I buried you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I buried you, and now you've come back. You're not my son. You're a demon." His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. It was in that moment that everything clicked into place. I felt a cold, dark satisfaction settle over me, a truth I had been denying even to myself. I stood up straighter, my fear melting away, replaced by a grim resolve. "Hello, Dad," I said, my voice steady and eerily calm. He recoiled as if struck, his eyes wide with horror. No, it can't be. I killed you." I nodded slowly, a twisted smile spreading across my face. "You did, but I came back." His terror was palpable, a stark contrast to the confidence I now felt. The tables had turned, and I was no longer the victim. The man before me had confessed to murdering his son, and now he faced the consequences of his actions. He had spent years haunted by his guilt, and now his worst nightmare had come true. "Why?" he pleaded, his voice cracking. "Why are you here? What do you want from me?" I took a step closer, savoring the fear in his eyes. "Retribution," I said simply. "You took my life. Now I'm going to take yours." He fell to his knees. "Please forgive me. I was wrong. I loved you. I was just trying to save you." His desperate pleas for mercy fell on deaf ears. The spirit that had taken over my life demanded justice. I could feel the power within me, a force that had been growing stronger with each passing day. The time had come to unleash it. "You thought you could bury your sins and forget them," I said, my voice cold and unyielding. "But I'm back to make you pay." I focused on the energy inside me, feeling it build and swell. It was a dark, powerful force, something beyond the realm of human understanding. As I channeled it towards him, I saw the recognition in his eyes, the realization that his end was near. The air around us seemed to vibrate with intensity. He began to shake, his body convulsing as the energy I directed at him took hold. His screams were high and desperate, a cacophony of regret and terror. I watched as his form began to break apart, his molecules vibrating at an impossible speed. His screams turned into a gurgle. And then, silence. His body disintegrated, turning into a fine mist that drifted away, dissipating into nothingness. The room was still once more. The oppressive weight of his presence finally lifted. I stood alone in my studio, the aftermath of the struggle evident in overturned furniture and broken equipment. but I felt no remorse, no guilt, only a cold satisfaction that justice had been served. The chaos of the struggle had given way to a profound stillness, broken only by the occasional creak of the apartment settling. I stood amidst the wreckage, my breath steady, my heart no longer racing. The sense of power and satisfaction was overwhelming. I turned to the now blank screen of my computer. The live feed long ended. My viewers had witnessed the horror up to a point, but the true climax, the revelation and retribution, had been mine alone. A dark part of me relished the secrecy, the knowledge that I had avenged my own death in a way no one could understand. The immediate danger was over, but I knew this was just the beginning of a new chapter. The police would undoubtedly investigate the disappearance of my stalker. There would be questions, perhaps even suspicions, but I was prepared. I had become adept at living a double life, and now, with newfound power, I felt invincible. I began the meticulous process of cleaning up. The broken furniture, the scattered equipment, it all had to be restored. As I worked, I replayed the events in my mind, each detail etched into my memory. The look of horror on his face, his desperate pleas, the final moment of his disintegration. It was a memory I would savor for a long time. Once the studio was back in order, I sat down to reflect. The police investigation would turn up nothing, no body, no evidence of a crime. The man had simply vanished, as if he had never existed. The authorities would eventually move on, assuming he had fled or met some other end. They would never know the truth. I resumed my daily routines, though with a renewed sense of purpose. My content creation flourished, each video infused with a subtle undercurrent of confidence and strength. My followers noticed the change, commenting on the new energy I seemed to radiate. They had no idea what had transpired, but they responded to the shift in me. As the days turned into weeks, the memory of the stalker faded into the background. The fear that had once gripped me was gone, replaced by an unshakable sense of control. I had faced my worst nightmare and emerged victorious. The spirit within me, the one that had sought vengeance, was now a part of who I was. One evening, as I was wrapping up a particularly successful live stream, I paused to reflect on the journey, the rise to fame, the terrifying ordeal, and the ultimate retribution had all shaped me into someone new. I had been a victim, but now I was something more, something powerful. The night was quiet as I stepped out onto my balcony, the city lights twinkling below. The cool breeze brushed against my skin, and for the first time in a long while, I felt truly free. The stalker was gone, his presence nothing more than a shadow that had been dispelled. In his place, I had found a strength I never knew I possessed. The power I had harnessed, the energy that had destroyed him, was still within me. I could feel it, a constant, pulsing force. It was a reminder of what I had endured and overcome, and it was a promise of what I could achieve. As I stood there looking out over the city, a recognition crossed my mind. My life would never be the same. The darkness that had once threatened to consume me had been transformed into a source of strength. I was no longer afraid. I was no longer vulnerable. I was in control. With a final deep breath, I turned back inside, ready to continue my journey. The future was uncertain, but I faced it with a newfound confidence. I conquered my fear, avenged my death, and reclaimed my life. The spirit within me was strong, and I was ready for whatever lay ahead. It was a bone-chilling autumn night when Jake and I decided to brave an all-nighter in the campus library. The Gothic structure loomed against the darkening sky, its arched windows catching glimmers of moonlight that barely illuminated its towering walls. The place was imposing enough by day, a labyrinth of towering shelves and shadowed alcoves. But at 2 a.m., the library transformed into something else, an ancient beast fast asleep, each step we took echoing as if to remind us of all the secrets the library guarded. We chose a secluded study room in the far wing, a place cut off from the main hall by long corridors where no one would stumble upon us by accident. The heavy oak door groaned on its hinges, and the room sealed us in with an ominous click. A single dusty bulb buzzed and flickered overhead, casting sickly shadows across the room's sparse interior. One scarred wooden table, 2 straight-back chairs, and a large window that opened into the cold, sprawling campus grounds below. Every corner of the room seemed cloaked in shadow, each flicker of the light teasing at something lurking just beyond sight. Hours passed, and the quiet had started to work its way into my bones. That's when I first saw it. A shadow, there 1 second, gone the next, moving swiftly along the far wall. I blinked, wondering if the exhaustion was playing tricks on me, but a prickle of unease snaked down my spine. I forced my eyes back to my book, trying to shake the chill that had settled over me, but then Jake stiffened beside me, his face pale in the dim light. Did you see that?" he whispered, his voice taut with fear. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. "Probably nothing," I murmured, though I didn't believe it. The rational part of me struggled to explain it away. Light playing tricks, stress, sleep deprivation. But as I scanned the room again, shadows seemed to cling to the corners, pulsating, shifting as if watching us with dark intent. The minutes crawled by, each one heavier than the last. Then we heard it, a faint whisper, like dry leaves rustling against pavement, but there was no wind, no movement. We froze, straining to listen, but the sound was gone, leaving only a creeping dread in its wake. "Maybe we should check it out?" Jake suggested. Reluctantly, we left the isolated safety of the study room, stepping out into the library's cavernous expanse. The air was thick and heavy, and the silence seemed to press in on us, amplifying every creak of the floorboards beneath our feet. As we moved deeper into the library, the shadows seemed to shift and stretch, flickering at the edge of our vision. They danced along the bookshelves, elongating, melding into shapes that seemed almost human, watching, waiting. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of unintelligible murmurs, like 100 voices speaking just beyond the veil. My pulse thundered and my skin prickled as an unshakable feeling of being watched settled over us. Then, from the darkness, figures began to emerge, drifting forward as if they had been waiting for us. Hooded figures, faceless, their forms blacker than the night, like moving voids that devoured any light near them. They glided soundlessly, their dark cloaks swirling, each one exuding a menace that chilled me to my bones. Jake and I stopped dead, unable to tear our eyes away from them. My mind screamed to run, but my legs felt cemented to the ground, frozen by pure terror. Slowly, deliberately, the hooded figures began to advance, their movements slow at first, but picking up pace with each step, the whispers crescendo, a chaotic chant of unintelligible words twisting into laughter, high, mocking, inhuman. The sound reverberating through the library like an unholy choir, resonating deep in my chest. Panic gripped me, and with a sudden burst of energy, we turned and bolted, our footsteps pounding as we raced through the aisles. Shelves loomed overhead like towering monoliths, books casting shadows that seemed to shift and stretch as if reaching for us. My breathing came in ragged gasps, and I could hear Jake's frantic panting beside me. But no matter how fast we ran, the hooded figures were there, keeping pace, their laughter echoing, haunting us. Our path twisted and turned, a labyrinth that offered no escape, only deeper shadows and endless shelves. Suddenly, we stumbled into a dead-end room, slamming the door shut behind us. The silence was suffocating as we pressed our backs against the wall, watching in horror as shadows pooled under the door, spilling into the room like dark ink seeping into every corner. The hooded figures slid through the doorway, one by one, their forms filling the space, suffocating, consuming, their hollow eyes fixed on us as they closed in, until one figure stepped forward and, with a deliberate slowness, pulled back his hood. Kyle. The face of our tormentor emerged, smug and smirking. Kyle, the notorious prankster from a rival fraternity, stood there, his grin spreading as he saw the terror written across our faces. One by one, the other figures pulled back their hoods, revealing themselves to be his frat brothers, all doubled over in laughter, clapping each other on the back as though they had pulled off the prank of the century. My horror gave way to a white-hot rage as realization dawned. This was all a prank? My voice was a strangled cry of fury. But before I could take a step, Jake collapsed, clutching his chest. The laughter died in an instant, replaced by silence thick with dread. Kyle's smirk faded as Jake gasped, his eyes wide with terror. I dropped to my knees beside him, my hands trembling as I tried to help, but his breathing grew weaker, his body slackening with each desperate breath. One of the frat boys fumbled for his phone, dialing 911, his hands shaking as he tried to explain to the dispatcher. But the minutes felt like hours, and with every passing second, Jake's life slipped further away. His eyes fluttered, then rolled back, leaving me clutching his still form in disbelief. The paramedics arrived, but it was too late. The library, once a silent hall of knowledge, now felt like a mausoleum. Its shadows cast long over the faces of those who thought fear was a game. As I cradled Jake's head in my lap, the horror of that night burned into my memory. The frat boys were expelled, their lives forever stained by the consequences of their thoughtless prank. And the library, it was never the same again. The whispers never stopped. I never thought I'd find myself alone in the wilderness, seeking solace from the chaos of my life. Yet, here I am, standing at the edge of Olympic National Park, the towering trees casting long shadows in the fading afternoon light. My name is Terrence, and I'm here for some much-needed me time. After my husband of 6 years blindsided me with a divorce, he left me for a younger man. And while I thought I was secure in my identity and comfortable in my own skin, his betrayal sent me into an emotional tailspin. At 40-something, I always prided myself on being resilient, but this breakup hit me harder than I expected. I needed to get away, to escape the memories and the suffocating emptiness of our now empty home. So I packed my gear and drove to the north end of Olympic National Park, an area made famous by those Twilight movies. I figured the remote beauty of the back country would provide the perfect backdrop for some self-reflection and healing. The park's entrance was bustling with tourists, but I had no intention of staying in the crowded campgrounds. I wanted isolation, a place where I could scream into the void and not be heard by anyone. After securing the necessary permits for backcountry camping, I set off on foot, my heavy pack digging into my shoulders with every step. The forest around me was alive with the sounds of nature, a symphony of birdsong, rustling leaves, and the distant rush of a stream. The first day of hiking was grueling but rewarding. I pushed myself hard, eager to put as much distance as possible between myself and civilization. By late afternoon, I found a secluded spot deep in the back country, far from the well-trodden paths. It was perfect, a small clearing surrounded by ancient trees, with a clear view of the sky. As I set up my tent and unrolled my sleeping bag, a sense of calm began to wash over me. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of peace. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I sat by my campfire, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the trees. I thought about my ex-husband, the life we had built together, and how it all fell apart so quickly. The pain was still fresh, but out here, it seemed more manageable, less suffocating. I knew I had a long way to go before I could truly move on, but this was a start. The night came swiftly, the temperature dropping as the stars began to pepper the darkening sky. Wrapped in my sleeping bag, I listened to the crackling of the dying campfire and the gentle rustle of the leaves. The silence of the forest was both comforting and unnerving, stark contrast to the bustling city life I was accustomed to. I drifted into a restless sleep, my dreams a tangled mess of memories and fears. It must have been around midnight when I was jolted awake by an unfamiliar sound. At first I thought it was a dream, but as I lay there, the noises grew louder, more insistent. My heart was pounding. I strained to identify the source of the sounds. They were unlike anything I had ever heard. They weren't the usual forest noises, no rustling leaves or distant animal calls. They were strange, otherworldly noises like rising and falling in eerie, rhythmic waves. It was as if the forest itself was breathing, exhaling a chorus of haunting whispers and guttural moans. Fear rooted me to the spot. I knew I should get up, unzip the tent, and investigate, but the thought of what I might find outside paralyzed me. My mind raced through possibilities: a bear, a pack of wolves, or maybe even a mountain lion. But deep down, I knew these sounds didn't belong to any earthly creature. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as I laid there, clutching my sleeping bag, every muscle tense with anticipation. The sounds ebbed and flowed, sometimes almost fading away entirely, only to return with renewed intensity. I tried to focus on my breathing to calm myself down, but the fear was overwhelming. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the noises began to subside. I lay still, straining my ears for any sign of their return, but the forest had fallen silent once more. The relief was palpable, but it was tempered by a lingering sense of unease. What had I just experienced? Was it a figment of my imagination, or was something truly out there? I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Every rustle of the leaves, every creak of the branches set my nerves on edge. When the first light of dawn filtered through the trees, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I had made it through the night, but the fear and uncertainty still lingered. As I stepped out of my tent, the morning air was crisp and cold. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the remnants of fear, but as I surveyed my campsite, a new wave of unease washed over me. My belongings were scattered around, as if something had rummaged through them in the night. A couple of items were knocked over, and my backpack had been moved a few feet from where I had left it. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what I was seeing. The rational part of my mind insisted it must have been an animal, maybe a raccoon or a curious deer. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something else had been here, something far more unsettling. Gathering my thoughts, I decided to focus on the day ahead. I couldn't let one strange night ruin my trip. I had come here to find peace, to heal, and I wasn't going to let fear take that away from me. On day 2, the morning sun filtered through the dense canopy, casting dappled light across the forest floor. Despite the unsettling events of the night, I was determined to make the most of my time in the wilderness. After a quick breakfast, I packed a small day pack with essentials and set off to explore the area, hoping a day of hiking would clear my mind. The forest was beautiful in the early morning light, the towering trees creating a sense of timelessness and solitude. As I walked, I tried to shake off the lingering unease from the night before, telling myself it had just been a curious animal, but as much as I tried to rationalize it, a nagging feeling of dread persisted. A couple of hours into my hike, I began to notice strange things along the trail. At first, it was subtle, a flash of movement out of the corner of my eye, or a rustling in the underbrush that seemed out of place. I chalked it up to my imagination, still on edge from the previous night. But then, the hallucinations began. I would glance at a tree trunk and see it twist into an alien, a grotesque face, only for it to return to normal when I looked again. Shadows seemed to move independently, taking on vaguely humanoid shapes before melting back into the forest. Each time I tried to focus on these apparitions, they disappeared, leaving me questioning my sanity. My heart raced as I continued along the trail, each step filled with growing anxiety. The forest, which had once seemed so peaceful, now felt oppressive, as if it were watching me, waiting for something. I stopped to catch my breath, leaning against a tree, and closed my eyes, hoping to steady myself. When I opened them again, my blood ran cold. Standing in the middle of the trail was a group of beings unlike anything I had ever seen. They were tall and slender, with elongated limbs and eyes that glowed with an unnatural light. Their skin shimmered with an iridescent sheen, reflecting the surrounding foliage in a distorted and unsettling way. I froze, too terrified to move or speak. The beings didn't seem hostile, but their presence was undeniably menacing. As I stood there, paralyzed with fear, a voice echoed in my mind. It wasn't a sound, but a feeling, a thought, projected deeply and directly into my consciousness. "You have been chosen," the voice said, calm and authoritative. "Do not be afraid." Despite the reassurance, my fear only deepened. I had no idea what these creatures wanted or what they meant by chosen. The voice continued, explaining that they were interdimensional travelers, seeking out individuals marked for imminent death. They described their mission to find special people, intelligent, talented, diplomatic, and offer them a chance at a new existence. My mind raced, trying to process what I was hearing. They explained that I had been marked for death, but they could offer me an escape. They would replace me with a clone in my dimension, someone to live out my final hours while I was taken to their world, where I could continue to grow and develop. The offer sounded tempting, a way out of the pain and turmoil that had consumed my life. But something about it felt off, too convenient. As I stood there, weighing my options, the voice pressed on, emphasizing the beauty and excitement of the new existence they promised. Against my better judgment, and perhaps driven by desperation, I agreed. The moment I did, the beings stepped aside, creating a shimmering portal that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. I took a deep breath and stepped through, leaving my old life behind. The sensation of crossing dimensions was indescribable, a rush of colors and sounds followed by a sudden jarring stillness. I found myself in a strange alien landscape, the sky a swirling vortex of colors, the ground beneath my feet shifting like liquid. Before I could take in my surroundings, I was grabbed by unseen forces and thrown into a cold, metallic cage, the bars humming with an unsettling energy. My captors, the beings who had promised me a new life, now regarded me with detached curiosity, their eyes devoid of any empathy. The cage was small, barely enough room to sit comfortably, and the ground was hard and unyielding. The air was thick with a metallic tang, and the only sounds were the faint hum of machinery and the occasional whisper of the being's telepathic communications. My heart sank as the reality of my situation set in. The first few days were a blur of confusion and fear. The beings would approach my cage at intervals, their eyes scanning me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. They would poke and prod me with strange instruments, their expressions revealing nothing. Each touch sent waves of pain through my body, but they seemed indifferent to my suffering. I quickly realized that their promise of a beautiful and exciting new existence had been a lie. I was nothing more than an experiment to them, a curiosity to be studied and dissected. The initial shock gave way to a deep, gnawing despair. I had traded one kind of captivity for another, and this one was far worse. Days turned into weeks, and I lost track of time. The beings' tests grew more invasive and painful, their methods more cruel. They seemed fascinated by my reactions, as if they were cataloging every scream and flinch. I tried to fight back at first, but the cage's energy fields zapped my strength, leaving me weak and powerless. As the days dragged on, I began to notice other cages around me, each one containing a different creature. Some were alien, others more familiar, but still out of place in this dimension. All of them shared the same look of despair, the same sense of hopelessness that I felt. We were all prisoners here, victims of the being's insatiable curiosity. I found myself longing for the simplicity of my old life, the pain of my divorce now seeming trivial in comparison to the horrors I faced daily. The forest, with its strange noises and eerie hallucinations, felt like a distant, almost comforting memory. I had been so desperate to escape my pain that I hadn't considered the consequences of my decision. The feeling of captivity was overwhelming, a constant weight on my chest. I spent hours staring at the bars of my cage, trying to find a way out, but there was no escape. The beings had planned everything meticulously, their traps inescapable. My regret grew with each passing day, a bitter reminder of the choice I had made. Yet, even in the depths of my despair, a small spark of determination remained. I couldn't let them break me completely. I had to find a way to survive, to endure their tortures and outlast their experiments. I began to observe my captors more closely, noting their patterns and routines, looking for any weakness I could exploit. My body was bruised and battered, but my mind remained sharp. I knew that if I gave up, they would win. So I held on to that small spark, fanning it into a flame of resistance. I didn't know what my future held, but I refused to let them strip me of my humanity. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, I clung to that flame, using it to push back against the darkness that threatened to consume me. I would find a way out, I told myself. I would survive this nightmare and reclaim my freedom, no matter the cost. Months passed in that metallic cage. The constant hum of machinery and the clinical stares of my captors became my new reality. My body had endured endless experiments, each one more painful than the last. But still, I held on to that spark of determination. I had to believe there was a way out, a way to reclaim my freedom. One day, the routine changed. The beings approached my cage with a new sense of urgency, their telepathic whispers more frenetic than usual. They opened the cage, their eyes fixed on me with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. I was led through a labyrinth of corridors, the walls shimmering with the same iridescent light as their skin. I was brought into a large chamber filled with strange machinery and other cages. My heart raced as I saw other prisoners, their eyes filled with the same mix of fear and determination. We were all here for a reason, I realized. The beings had gathered us for something significant. The leader of the beings, a taller figure with a more pronounced glow, stepped forward. "You have shown resilience," the voice echoed in my mind. "We did not expect such strength. Perhaps there is more to you than we anticipated." Before I could respond, the machinery around us sprang to life, filling the chamber with a low, pulsing hum. The other prisoners and I exchanged wary glances, our shared sense of uncertainty palpable. What were they planning? The leader continued. "You have a choice, Terrence. You can remain here, continue to endure our tests, or you can join us, help us understand your kind, bridge the gap between our dimensions. Your knowledge and resilience could be invaluable." I stared at the being, my mind racing. Was this another trick? Another lie? But deep down I knew I had little choice. I could either continue to suffer in my cage, or I could take a chance on this new offer. Maybe, just maybe, this was my way out. "I'll do it," I said, my voice trembling but resolute. "I'll help you." The leader nodded, a strange glimmer of satisfaction in its eyes. "Very well, Terrence. Your journey begins anew." As I was led away from the chamber, the feeling of being imprisoned still hung over me, but now it was mixed with a sense of purpose. I didn't know what the future held, but I was determined to find out. I would uncover the truth about these beings, about their world, and about my place in it. The path ahead was uncertain and fraught with danger, but I was ready. My fight for survival had taken a new turn, and I would face it head on, no matter the cost. I would find a way to break free and reclaim my life, even if it meant navigating the complexities of this alien dimension. I had made the wrong choice once, but now, armed with determination and a sliver of hope, I was ready to make things right. My story was far from over. It had only just begun.